What's up everyone, it's Austin Rutherford here. You will not believe the amount of people that get into flipping houses and start losing money on their deals. I see it happen all the time, and the reason behind that is because they don't understand the actual real in and outs of actually flipping houses. They watch these flip or flop shows on TV, which they don't tell you the truth. They're all lies, and they think that it's that easy to get into the game. They miscalculate numbers, they completely leave out scope of work items, and eventually that leads to them losing money. And just to put into perspective what that means, you buy a house, you renovate it, you sell it, and you pay somebody else to buy the house from you. It's not a good feeling. I've been there before. And after this video, that's never going to be you, because you're going to learn from my mistakes. I'm going to show you step by step exactly how I flipped hundreds of houses and made millions of dollars. So before we get into that, make sure you smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. So when flipping houses, there's three big numbers that you need to know. The first one is called the ARV, the after repaired value of a property. So what does this even mean? It means what is the property going to sell for once you buy and renovate and then list this property for sale. It's not what you're buying it for, it's what the after repaired value is. And what the problem is that no house is exactly the same as another house. So you have to make adjustments when you're coming up with the after repaired value. So you look in your neighborhood for other renovated properties that are selling in the condition that your property will be in after the renovation and come up with an ARV. But the problem is that people overshoot this ARV to make the deal work, right? So if a house is truly worth an ARV of 300 grand, they'll see another house next door sell for 320. But the problem is that has 4 beds and yours has 3 beds, but you don't look at that and you're like, oh yeah, I can sell for 320,000. You will lose money because you're not selling for 320,000 because they have an extra bedroom. So the biggest problem that I see is people overshooting the after repaired value and thinking that they're going to sell the property for more than they actually can. And the second number that you need to know is the renovation budget. People screw this up all the time because they don't actually understand the actual cost of renovating houses. So they get into it and they underestimate the rehab budget. My team and my students use a renovation calculator, and you need to build one for yourself so you and the people around you can understand what and how much it actually costs to renovate houses. This is our spreadsheet right here that you can see. And they get into it and they start cutting the renovation budget because they think that they'll actually be able to save money. The problem is that the rehab budget is a fixed cost. You can't cut the budget. Like if you have to cut down a tree, you got to cut down a tree. If you got to replace the roof, you got to replace the roof. If you got to buy a toilet, you got to buy a toilet. There's no way to get around the rehab budget. Like it is a fixed cost. Variable costs are things like interest rate, term of the loan, amortization schedule. Those are variable. Those can change. The rehab budget cannot change. It's a fixed rate. And the third thing is that both of those numbers lead to the purchase price. Us personally, we look to make 13 to 20% per flip. So if we buy and renovate and sell a house, let's say the ARV is 200 grand, we're looking to net profit $26,000 to $40,000 on that deal for us to think that it's a good deal to buy it and to move forward with it. And the larger the rehab, the more profit we want because it leaves us more room for error. And the problem is some people will go into these things and pinch their margins so small and only be looking to make 5 to 10% profit margin. So when one thing goes wrong, they end up losing money on the deal. You have to have enough margin for error, one of which is a contingency budget for unexpected costs. If you have no room for error, you'll most likely lose money because projects rarely ever go according to plan. Now, those are where a lot of the errors come into play when people losing money, but there's a lot of other smaller ones as well. People forget to calculate the purchase closing costs, the selling closing costs, the realtor fees, the interest to your private money lender, the utility costs, the insurance cost, the HOA costs, the grass cutting costs, all these additional costs that seem smaller, but when you forget them, they definitely add up over time. And hold time is just as important as those other 3 numbers that we discussed. So if you plan to buy, renovate, and sell a property in 90 days, you have holding costs, you have interest to your lenders, you have utilities, you have property taxes, you have insurance, you have all these things, the smaller costs that we talked about. The problem is if your timeline goes from 90 days to 300 days and you 3 times the amount of time that you're planning on holding the property, if your holding costs were 10 grand for 90 days, that 10 grand turns into 30 grand. And that's a huge difference in what you budgeted, and you can very quickly lose money with those additional expenses. So for certain deals, sometimes you can buy, renovate, and sell in 90 days. Other times it might take 12 to 24 months. It depends on the size of the project. So talk with your contractors to figure out a realistic timeline for construction, and then you have to add on time to actually sell the property after after the construction's done. Now, once you have all these numbers, it's easy. You literally punch a couple numbers into a spreadsheet, you look at the spreadsheet and it lights up green or red, and it's like, yep, it's green, time to buy, or nope, it's red, we're moving on to the next one. So you cannot have emotion with those things. You have to have a spreadsheet. You have to have a number that you're looking for. Here's the spreadsheet that we use, but you gotta have a spreadsheet that removes the emotion from the decision-making process, so you make decisions based on numbers, not based on emotions. And you gotta be real with your numbers. They run the analyzer and they're like, oh man, this isn't a deal. So then they dive into the numbers a little bit more and they're like, oh no, I think I can sell this for 320 instead of 300. And then they're like, well, I think the rehab budget's like 35 instead of 50. And now they're pinching these numbers to unrealistic targets. And on paper, the deal looks good. And if you were able to hit those numbers, the deal would be profitable. The problem is that you can't get the project renovated for that budget, and you can't sell the house for what you thought you could sell it for because it's just not realistic. You have to be realistic with your numbers, and you gotta have margin for error even when you're realistic, because things still do go wrong at times. So at the end of the day, if you run your numbers correctly, you'll be just fine and you won't lose money on houses. But if you start messing up the numbers, you may start losing money on houses. So if you're ever interested in actually learning and getting coached by me, there's a link in the description below. You can check that out. I would love to work with you to teach you how to flip houses profitably. So drop any questions you have in the comment section. I would be happy to answer those. Make sure while you're down there, you smash that like button, hit that subscribe and notification bell so you can get all this content going forward. As always, appreciate you being here. We'll see you on the next one.